Hey, Jesus said in Matthew 5:19 to do and teach God's law. This is God's law number 13 on coveting and how to not covet. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Jim McCotter. This is the 10th of the 10 commandments. Deuteronomy 5, verse 21. Quote, "You must not covet your neighbor's wife. You must not long for your neighbor's house or land, male or female servant or ox or donkey or anything else that belongs to your neighbor." End quote. This may be the hardest commandment to keep. It has everything to do with what you think. It makes no reference to what you do, yet causes you to do everything you do that is wrong. You can't do anything that you have not first thought about, and usually thought about a lot. This can be good news or bad news. Here's the good news. You can keep yourself from doing wrong. All you have to do is control your mind and what you think. Here's the bad news. You cannot keep yourself from doing wrong if you continually think about it on your mind and dwell on doing it. The Apostle James said in James chapter 1, verse 12 through 15, quote, "God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they'll receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. But remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, 'God is tempting me.' God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death." End quote. Jesus was not changing God's law in Matthew 5 when he said, quote, "The law says this, but I say," and he says something else. Rather, he was capturing the spirit of the law and also telling us how we can better keep the law by how we think. For example, in Matthew 5:27-28, he says, "You have heard the commandment that says, 'You must not commit adultery.' But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." If Jesus was saying the Old Testament law was no longer applicable here, then you would be saying it is wrong to lust in adultery, but not wrong to commit adultery. That is obviously not true. I won't take time here to go over every verse in chapter 5, but if Jesus was nullifying the law, then there would be no basis for how he says to better keep the law, or in other places, how to capture the spirit of the law and how to better love your neighbor. Not to just keep from violating the law and sinning against your neighbor. Moreover, Jesus would be clearly contradicting himself when at the beginning Jesus said in Matthew 5:17-19, and reading in part, Jesus said, quote, "Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses. Until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." End quote. This is why we're going over all God's law. Jesus summarized his law in Matthew 22:37-40, and reading in part again. Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commands." End quote. To reject God's law is to reject loving God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. All God's law is based on this. Only God's ceremonial law, which Christ fulfilled, is no longer for us today, but all the rest of God's moral law, 10 commandments, statutes, and judgments, is for us personally and for our civil law. John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, he wrote, as recorded in Letters of John Quincy Adams to his son on the Bible and its teachings, recorded in 1850 by James Alden, he said, quote, The law given on Sinai was a civil and municipal as well as a moral and religious code, end quote. How to keep from coveting. So now, how do we keep from coveting? The question should be, how do we control our mind? Peter said in 1 Peter 1:13, quote, so prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Set your mind and your hope to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming, end quote. Study what will happen to you at that time. Then think about that. Meditate on it. 1 John 3:2-3 says this, beloved, we are already God's children, but he has not yet shown us what we will be like when Christ appears. But we do know that we will be like him, for we will see him as he really is. And all who have this eager expectation will keep themselves pure, just as he is pure, end quote. The Apostle Paul said in Romans 12, verse 2, quote, let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think, end quote. Paul said in Philippians 4:8, quote, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if anything worthy of praise, think about these things, end quote. Solomon said in Proverbs 2:23, guard your heart and mind above all else, for it determines the course of your life, end quote. Solomon also said in Proverbs 23:7, quote, for if a man as he thinks in his heart and mind, so is he, end quote. Joshua said in Joshua 1:8, quote, keep this book of the law always on your lips, meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful, end quote. David said in Psalms 1:2-3, quote, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He'll be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does, he prospers, end quote. David also said in Psalms 119:11, quote, I have stored up your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you, end quote. The Apostle Paul, he said in Colossians 3:16 in closing, quote, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your heart to God, end quote. Don't covet. Memorize all these verses so you can meditate on them to obey them, and let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Love others. Pray. Start by memorizing one of these verses today.